Welcome back to today's episode of Functioning, everyone. I'm super excited to have you back. We are sponsored today by GTS, the End User Experts, and One Gun Entertainment. And speaking of One Gun Entertainment, we're actually coming to you from the beach, where One Gun is channeling the energy and the healing music of Bob Marley all summer. So in case you're wondering why we got a little different background, we are coming to you from the beach.
That's right. Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Yes, we are here.
Well, one of the things I want to talk about is our sizzle reel really speaks to the idea that we're seeking a cure for schizophrenia, not only for our son, but for our family. And oftentimes we talk about the code, and what we really wanted to examine today is the code and what we mean by that code. So when we think about the healing space, we're not just thinking about our son, we're not just thinking about our family, but we're understanding that schizophrenia can meander through a family, and we really want to talk about it from that standpoint today. So super excited to get us kicked off here. So One Gun, you want to tell us about the code?
Yeah, so Lovey always talks about the code, right? And what do we mean by that? People have asked, what do you mean by the code? Well, if you're from where we come from, it's about our genetic code, our DNA. It's our life's assignment as humans on this planet, right? So the genetic code uses 4 nucleotide bases of DNA, and they are adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine. Hopefully I got that right. And in various ways, they spell out, once again, our DNA. Now, if you ask me, this is very specific to our assignment from the creator of all things, right? So when we refer to the code in the future, everyone here on our Functioning podcast, it's based on this belief.
Yeah. Doesn't he sound all cute when he speaks all fancy and sciencey like? So appreciate that. And speaking of the code, we're thrilled to have with us today Dr. Sheila Becking, also known as Dr. Feelings.
Yes.
And Dr. Feelings comes to us today as a friend in this space. She has been an amazing family friend to us, and she happens to share the code. And she's also a renowned professional in the world of psychology. So welcome, Dr. Sheila.
Well, thank you. So happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. So Sheila specializes in addiction as well as the treatment of adolescents in her early career. And then she went on to treat geriatrics as well as now she's in private practice, right? Keep me honest here.
Yeah.
But today I'm really grateful that Dr. Feelings is here to talk to us about schizophrenia, not only as a family member, but as one of our dear, dear friends. So thank you for coming.
Now, Lovey said 2 names. She said Sheila, and she said Dr. Feelings. So, Sheila, why does she call you Dr. Feelings? Do you have any idea?
I'm not sure.
Okay, let me rephrase that. Wendy, why do you call her Dr. Feelings?
Wait a second. I call her Dr. Feelings because she's so inspirational in the world of feelings, right? She talks often about, how much our actions really derive from feelings. So that's why I call her Dr. Feelings.
Right. All right. Yep. And just so you guys know, Sheila is a close friend of the family, has really been beneficial in our quest to try to understand mental health and mental illness. Now, Sheila, can you tell us what inspired your work in mental health and why you chose this field of all the fields in the world?
So, what inspired me? I think it's a lot of things. Again, I think who can say they haven't been touched by mental health or mental illness in some way these days? I think if you're honest with yourself, everyone has a family member who's dealt with depression or an anxiety disorder or schizophrenia. Same with addiction. It's almost like heart disease these days or high blood pressure. There are very few families who aren't affected by it. So definitely started it, I think, my curiosity in my own family as a young person, knowing that relatives were dealing with anxiety and depression. And schizophrenia specifically didn't come until later in my life. I was in my late adolescence, and a very close friend of mine, her mother was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And just the things she went through and that her mother went through and that their family went through, really, I had such compassion for the whole family, and the things that they were dealing with and the stigmas and what it was like growing up in that family for one of my closest friends. Of course, Wendy and you. Well, anyway, but yeah, so I was young, and that very close friend of mine, I just witnessed how society treated her mother, and I didn't know much about schizophrenia at the time. I knew about anxiety a little bit and a little bit about depression and addiction, but I didn't know much about schizophrenia. I was in high school, and some of the things we witnessed together, and she was, again, a teenager, so she was very embarrassed by her mother, as we are all embarrassed by our mothers.
Right.
But hers was a little different. Some of the things she was dealing with they were just inexplicable. We couldn't tell our friends this is why she's doing it. We didn't really understand. But again, my heart just went out to her because I just felt for her, and so that helped me first learn about schizophrenia. And then it was within a few years that my own family was touched by it with some of my cousins. One cousin in particular that I was very close to, an older cousin, a male, and he, I want to say, started showing signs around 1920, which is typical. So that really piqued my curiosity too, like what is going on. And we also didn't know. Everyone assumed it was drugs at the time. But it seemed different than drugs. So again, just all these different experiences I had. Really, I was a curious person and still am. So I wanted to learn more. I started volunteering at the time at the state hospital, which is, that kind of ages me because state hospitals haven't been around for a long time. We've since gone to community mental health mainly, but back in the day, people were institutionalized. And I actually started volunteering to learn more and just to, I was, again, just super interested and curious of what can I do to help. And so that was my first kind of introduction into the world of mental health and mental illness. So
The vibe within the family, we're hearing that right now. But as far as your professional world, have you dealt with patients that have been clinically diagnosed with schizophrenia?
So I have in my earlier part of my career, and I have dealt with people who've had psychotic symptoms, like a schizoaffective disorder, or bipolar with psychotic features, or depression with psychotic features, which is when people have either delusions or hallucinations with their depression or with a bipolar illness. And then there are people that I've worked with who have just had psychotic disorders and been misdiagnosed by other people and been referred to me because the treatment that they're using, their traditional therapy, they're not getting better. It's not helping them. They're very paranoid about people or things like that. And after meeting with them once or twice and assessing them, I'm like, this is not social anxiety. There's something else going on here.
Mm-hmm.
And come to find out there's some delusions or paranoia or something like that. So
Did you start out by saying, hey, these people are crazy? Because that's where everyone else starts. First they're crazy, and then you dig a little bit deeper, right?
Right. I think that's where the other practitioners were a little less experienced and maybe educated in diagnosing, more in counseling. And so being a psychologist, we learned to diagnose in the field of psychology. So it's like, no, if you really dig into these things, it's a little bit more than, there's we try to stay away from the word crazy, but
Right.
something's going on here. I can't quite make it. But early in my career, when I worked with addiction, we would see a lot of young people that would have, again, hallucinations or delusions. And early in their life, and I was working with adolescents early in my career, it was hard to know because it's the time of life, especially for males, that they develop schizophrenia. So there might be some experimenting going on with drugs or alcohol, and family members have no idea what's happening here. So, I think many of our families, Wendy, you included, that there's that age where it's like everyone else assumes it's something that it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yep. And I'm so grateful that my friend was right there, ringside seats, she said, to everything that we experienced, and really was a great guide, for us. So thank you for sharing those early experiences. And one of the pieces that I've kind of recruited her on is this whole idea that, hey, we got to find a cure for this thing. And, she's curious, as she indicated. So it's like everything brain, I'm always running it by her. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? And so one of the pieces that we've talked about with the brain behavior, and I'm going to share this with everyone. We're reviewing this piece that the brain behavior, and if you haven't listened to their monthly, I think they have monthly podcasts where they bring in scientists and really start to really look at some of the cures that are out there and some of the treatment that's out there. So it's really fascinating stuff. And one of the latest pieces that they did was really taking a look at the genome. And again, I'm going to be really cautious not to get too fancy with some of the science stuff because I'm not a scientist or a doctor, right? But the reality is that they mapped the entire human genome back to Marvin. Tell us what those codes were again.
Adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine.
Yeah. So basically, they looked at the entire genome of really what makes up humans, and they started to look at all of those different pieces. And what they were hoping is that they could find where certain things showed up. Like, where do you get your eye color? What genome determines your skin color? All of those basic things. But I think they were hoping, and I was too, right? Just sitting here, praying that they were going to be able to find where in the genome schizophrenia was, and they couldn't find it, which was heartbreaking. They found like variations of it throughout the genome, kind of like it meanders through your family. It also meanders through this genome, which makes it really difficult to treat. But anyways, these scientists on this podcast were talking about, okay, well, let's take a look at it. If we can't find it specifically, then let's find where it doesn't show up. So one of the things, we've often talked about is, how did it go kind of through me, right? Where, schizophrenia started with my father, undiagnosed, and reappeared in my son. And I always think, how did it go right through me?
And you believe it went through you? Is that what you're saying? I just want to be clear in understanding here.
In theory,
just
yes.
Sure.
That's why I have to ask my friend often, is this my schizophrenia acting up or is this my wisdom? I never know what's at play. But anyways, this podcast does a great kind of discussion around, well, if you take two twins, one having schizophrenia and the other not, instead of them figuring out why the twin with schizophrenia had it, they are now taking a look to figure out, well, why did the other twin not get it, right? So they're calling that resiliency. I'll share it with you. It's pretty good stuff. But I shared it with Sheila, and we kind of talk about that often. And I'm just curious, do you worry at all about it kind of popping up in your code someplace else? And has that been something that you're paying attention to in all of your work?
I mean, we've definitely talked about this subject many times. And I think for me, because it affected the males in my family, I don't know why it never occurred to me. And I have two daughters, but I could have just really had a male. But also I think my cousins were close enough, but not, that I thought, I just thought it'd be okay. If it did happen, I guess it never, obviously it didn't stop me from having children. So, but it does, I mean, definitely this idea that it skips generations or certain family members or even identical twins. I think that a lot of new information is coming from that place right now, which is, I love. It's fascinating. And I love this idea of looking at the person who's not affected in the family or the twin who's not affected, versus the one who is. Why is that? What is being turned on and off in their genes because they're identical? So the genes are still there, but something's different. Something's presenting itself so differently in one versus the other.
And what's crazy is what's interesting. We won't use the word crazy, but is that your kids? I'm just putting this out there, but they're not adults yet, so they are, they could be along that line, they may not. But do you find yourself like keeping an eye out for it, watching for it, especially since you've been talking to us? we, we've been discussing this for
not,
quite a while now.
not to plant any
And you know our
seeds.
situation, yeah. You know our situation. It didn't happen till our
Right.
son was 19, 20. So how do you feel about that as far as your kids coming of age?
Girls are later. It shows up for
Yeah.
women
Hmm.
generally at least 5 to 10 years later than it typically shows up for males.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
I guess, and women present differently typically too than men. Not always, but often women show more externalizing or more outward behaviors, where men show more, more of they call them negative symptoms. I don't know if you guys have. I think you've talked about that on your I can't remember.
Yeah.
I don't need to get into that, but
Well, would you mind giving us just a couple of examples? Because I don't know if I know what you mean by outward symptoms.
Outward, more emotionally expressive and reactive. So, and interestingly, there's a lot of new research too on Parkinson's and autism, and how are they some sort of spectrum disorder where it shows up as autism if this gene gets activated earlier in life. So, sorry, I'm kind of going off on different things, but back to the code. Looking at, is the code different depending on what point in time the gene is expressed? There's some studies around that right now, which I think are really fascinating. But autism is something that I definitely did think about with both girls, both of my daughters, and have a little bit of concern about. And maybe because they're not really at the age where you typically would see signs and symptoms. When I say more externalizing, more emotion, more, especially things that you don't typically see in women, like aggression, things like that. I'm trying to think now.
Well, I could see too where that would be confusing, because a lot of girls in their late teens or early 20s could well, they might call them a drama queen, or what I mean, that
Right.
Emotions impact us more. So I could see where it too would be harder to diagnose or harder to understand what is it that we're seeing just based on behavior. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So Marvin, you were going to talk about our niece and nephew and kind of what
Yeah, well, I was doing some research on how does it coincide with nutrition, right? Our niece and nephew, since the day they were born, they've, stayed with us all the time, basically watched them grow up from just tiny tots. And of course, when they came to visit uncle and auntie, when it came down to eating, because of course, in their home, they had a certain eating regime, right? But when they came to hang out with us, we have our regime, and it does not include, junk food morning, noon, and evening. Okay, so the way we incorporated it was, and this is how I grew up. I think you guys might have grown up this way as well, but you don't get dessert until you eat your main course, until you eat your food. And if that food included veggies, you had to eat your veggies. Now, we weren't tyrants. We were that uncle and auntie that, they're going to make us eat our veggies, but we weren't tyrants. And of course, how did we suffice? Well, there was always something to do after we ate. We had an activity or we went somewhere. And believe me, with Auntie Wendy, there was always something to do. She always had something planned. So as I was doing some research on the internet, I came across the assessments of human nutrition, and it said they're not complete without consideration of the underlying genetic variability, which may be reflected as differences in nutritional processes such as absorption, metabolism, receptor action, and excretion, believe it or not. Now, trying to make a long story short, this inborn variation is quite different from, well, I guess it should include our heritage, our parents, our ancestors. But there are different variations, and the different variations exist under conditions of growth, conditions of pregnancy, and even old age. So again, genetic variation may also affect the foods we like. As I begin to talk about nutrition, I come from a personal training background, and tried to be healthy, wealthy, and wise as much as I could, not just with exercising, but also with eating and nutrition. So to find out that genetic variations may also affect food likes and dislikes as a consequence of nutrition was amazing. So bottom line, people, although you eat what your parents put in front of you, that is not exactly your favorite food. When you grow up and become your own entity and you cook for yourself and things like that, that's when you start incorporating your favorite foods. And I just hope that everyone, I call a dessert a treat, okay? But always incorporate healthy nutrition. And to me, that way you can thoroughly enjoy that treat. That's just the way I look at it.
Good advice from Uncle Marvin. And my piece to that is honestly, had I known that what I know now, my poor niece and nephew, like I said, I would have been walking around, with fish oil, following around
Well, I
trying to
did make
make
them wash
sure.
their hands all the time. Remember, they always had to wash their hands, even at 2 years old. I don't know how they
Right.
did it, but they did it.
I mean, how many of us look for, schizophrenia? And now that we know what we know around the code and things like that, of course, you want your kids to grow up healthy and well. But, do you find, Dr. Feelings, that you end up doing more, right, in terms of brain health now, knowing and with the work that you've done and that type of thing?
For sure. Yeah, definitely. And you and I talk about this often. One person's medicine is another person's poison.
Yeah.
So back to the code, I do what turns on and turns off, or what modifies your gene. Not your gene,
Right.
the expression. I shouldn't
Yeah.
say your gene's not modified. What
Yeah.
is
But the
expressed?
expression. Yeah.
Yes. So definitely healthy eating. And what I was just saying earlier about heart disease or high blood pressure, I could eat sugar after every meal, and I may never develop diabetes because it's not in my code, or it may take
Yeah.
until I'm 80 to develop diabetes.
Right.
But someone else who has different code, different DNA, they might develop it when they're 19.
Yeah.
So it may, because of their DNA, it's what they're taking in could modify the expression of that gene.
Yeah.
So yes, I am. I don't want to be.
You don't have to be a nut about it.
But I am very, like you know how I am. I am very much, let's try to eat what's nutritious and trying to figure out what's, I've done some different testing on both of my girls to see what is, and I found what was one daughter's poison was the other daughter's medicine, where she had an allergy. One of them had an allergy to a food that I was feeding them, and the other one had the allergy to this new food. So,
yeah, I mean, and the most obvious version, which has always blown my mind, is I'm eating peanuts as a snack and somebody else would eat it and it would literally kill them. So,
exactly.
It is kind of amazing. And back to that gene and, what's in your code and honoring your code along the way. So one other piece I wanted to share with our audience today around this, because we just heard this article on NPR, and I'm going to read it for you and I'm going to share it with everybody. But the article or the piece was a genetic analysis which explored the influence of African American ancestry and brain disease. And I shared that with you too, right, Dr. Sheila? And really, what the piece, it was a very small piece, easy to listen. So I'm gonna share the link with you guys. It's definitely thought provoking. But what it does is it examined African American brain disease, and it outlined how Parkinson was more likely to be diagnosed in Europeans, and schizophrenia was more likely to be diagnosed in African Americans. And of course, this sparked so much discussion between us, right? We're road tripping and we're like, what? Wait a minute, rewind, what? Right? Because we didn't know what to make of that. And the question is, when you say diagnosed, I mean, are you saying back to, if you're rich, you get to be eccentric, you know what I mean? And if you're poor, you're crazy. Like what was going into these diagnoses? So I didn't know, Dr. Sheila, did you happen to listen to that article, and did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah. Again, I don't know. I feel like we're on the cusp of learning so much more about this gene expression. And again, do these genes, is it possible? Is it a sociocultural thing? is that what's underlying this, or at least part of it? Or is it that in certain diets or certain environments, it presents earlier, midlife, or late in life, and it presents as different things? I don't know, so, but they're all kind of connected. So that was my takeaway from, especially reading other studies about how they're looking really at the connections between these three illnesses. So,
and when you think about studies, do you feel like if you had the choice or you had the control, do you feel like what are they not doing out there? Is there something that you can think of, just off the top of your head, like what would advance the studies? Of course, as everyone knows, we are hoping, searching, and looking for a cure for schizophrenia. I know they're coming up with things for everything else, but schizophrenia seems to be kind of hanging in the back. So, if there was anything you see in your industry that you could say, maybe if they did this, or people are thinking about trying this, maybe there's some new information you might have, but just speak to that.
Well, one of the things I think that they do a lot of quantitative studies. They do many more quantitative studies, which means a quantity of people. So where there are large groups of people, and try to make inferences off of that. And which I think that's an effective way to study people or disease or illness or things like that. But it's far more expensive to do a qualitative study or a longitudinal study. And there's a lot less money to make in something like that because it takes years of studying. So but I feel like with something like schizophrenia, especially thinking about it as a potentially either hormonal or developmental, or, what is this epigenetic thing that turns that gene on at this age in life? I feel like more longitudinal studies, especially in families where there might be, as you've said, Wendy, like where it seems to skip a generation or it skips twins, but maybe doing studies and starting in childhood in these families and really longitudinal throughout a person's life and seeing, it might end up being nothing, but what did that person do to not develop is, I think, also a direction that probably more studies need to.
Yeah, and let's just be clear, it did skip a generation in our family, so
I
I mean, I do have wisdom.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you say so.
Yeah. I like what you were saying too. And we've talked about this before because I'm obsessed with the brain, right? So part of what I'd like to see is, throw a ton of money at it. What are we waiting for? I mean, there's a ton that, it costs our society to have this kind of, rolling around. And the idea that let's just throw a lot of money at it. And I watch Parkinson's specifically because I heard that it's a cousin. Is that the one that's a cousin to schizophrenia?
Yeah.
Parkinson's? Yeah. And do you have any idea why? I know I'm really putting you on the spot.
Well, dopamine, it
okay.
works on the dopamine system. They know that. Again, it's like very low level knowledge for me. As I said, I'm not an expert in schizophrenia.
No, of course.
I'm in the realm, but I'm definitely not an expert. But dopamine is something that is a factor in both. So, money is a factor. Money is a huge, unfortunately, people who have schizophrenia often, again, it can scare family members. It can make it really hard. And so I think when you talk about throwing money at something, that's part of the reason, sadly, is people think, this is because of drugs, or and they shut people out of their life, or they do whatever we've seen.
And they end up homeless. Quite a few of them.
Yep. So,
well, just to our listeners out there, why, as you tune into our podcast Functioning Here, we're laughing and joking and having fun because from our perspective and within our family with our son, it initially started out as, extremely serious. And then there became the humorous sides of, being around our son who has schizophrenia. You start out by, taking them places, having them around certain people, having them talk about hearing voices in their head. And sometimes it's not all just that serious. So I know a lot of you out there are in dire situations. I know there are some scenarios where there's violence within the home and other scenarios where you've had to put a family member out of the home. But just speaking to our situation, we look more towards the humorous side of what's going on. But all in all, we're still trying to find that cure.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for that reminder, Honey Babe, because yeah, we know some people are really, really hurting right now in this moment. And
Mhm.
if that's true for you, we certainly, again, we encourage you to go seek out NAMI. These guys are amazing. They have great support systems. If you're in that early stage, we're 20 plus years into our journey. So, yeah, and really, Dr. Feelings, we not everybody has a Dr. Feelings in their life that can really help inspire and, kind of lead us down these paths. We've been really, really grateful for her to be a friend of ours and yeah, just being here. So what advice, I guess, Dr. Sheila, would you give them, as they're on their journey? Do you have any blanket advice?
Well, I agree with you. NAMI is phenomenal. They've done an amazing job. Um, and it's a great place for people to find resources, find friends, find people who are at different, like you just said, you're 20 years in, find different stages. There is hope. There is a lot, again, laughter is the best medicine. But also I think, yeah, finding meeting people and finding that support system or family members that can listen and hopefully without judgment and without advice as much as possible, particularly early on when it can feel very judgy, like, oh, just do this simple, just get them in school or just do this. And it's like, I wish it was that, you know,
Just feed them some veggies.
just feed them.
Some fish oil.
Give them
Right.
some fish oil. Yeah, there you go.
Exactly. Yeah. So and again, not that those things, they might help, they could help. It's true. It's hard, but I think when you're really in that place early on, it really is important to find people who are going to be there for you and who are going to listen. And it might, we talk about it takes a village. That's probably not just going to be one person. It's going to be several people in several places.
Yeah.
So I know we've been throwing around names. We've said Dr. Feelings. We said Dr. Sheila, and we call you Sheila. But I do have a question. How long have you been in the mental health field?
Well, practicing with a license.
Yes. Well, you can give us both. Give us both, right?
Yeah, it sounds like she started long before that, right?
Yes. But no, let's talk about practicing first. Okay, let's start
Practicing with a license. Gosh. Over 20 years, over close to 25, 30, 20
Okay.
years. Yeah.
So that was a loaded question because I wanted to ask, so you saw some things in your early stages of your career and you see some things now. Is there anything that has changed or progressed that you just look at it as mind-boggling compared to where things started out?
Oh my gosh. I could go on and on. Even where I started.
We've got time.
Even what I was saying about, the deinstitutionalization of, I was at a state hospital volunteering when I started, not my career, but I definitely really got interested and now it's community mental health, which I don't think institutionalizing people was the best answer, but I don't necessarily think where we're at now is, I feel like the pendulum has swung where it's just like, let people out, but how do they get resources and expecting people who can have people who have a difficult time following multi-step tasks, to expect them to find their own resources and to take care of their own, physical, let alone mental health needs is also
advocacy is huge, right?
Yes. So
definitely.
So that is a huge shift from when I started out. I definitely think the stigma has gotten much, much better. The language about it, the science behind it, what we know, we still, I feel like, are at the tip of the iceberg of what we know about mental health and schizophrenia. And I mean, you think about when you said that's the one that we know the least about. I think it is, and I think people are. It's something that escapes. It's like you've said before, Wendy. Everywhere I go, I ask questions. I ask the leaders questions, and no one has the answers yet. And I think there are lots of answers with other illnesses, but the brain is the most complex organ to begin with. And then you think about schizophrenia; it's one of the most complex diseases that we know of. So diagnoses that we know of, but it's being talked about now. Mental health is being talked about now, so that is huge. Where before it would be the thing people would whisper about,
Oh yeah.
Right.
You know, even if they were eccentric, right? It would be like,
you'd say eccentric under your
right,
breath.
Or crazy, yes, okay.
right, right.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that's amazing and awesome, and I do think that that is what's helping the mental health field and people getting help and getting resources and people advocating and not being afraid to say, this is my sister, this is my mom, this is my daughter who has schizophrenia, or my son, or, you know, where in the past, again, it would be that sort of whispering along the side or the ignoring of, or that sort of thing. So I think that that's come leaps and bounds from where I started, you know, in my early days.
And would you mind coming back and having some conversations with us about kind of that, you know, about some of the other subjects? Like you said, we could go on forever, but
I'd love to come back. Yeah, sure, of course.
yeah,
Of course.
yeah, that's yeah, that would be awesome. Well, I just want to thank you for what you've offered me and the family and the audience today. I appreciate you, and I appreciate the work that you're doing, holding hope for everybody, and really specifically for us and our family. So we appreciate you. And everyone else, you guys, if you know anybody, a family member that you need support for, yes, send them our way, right? If they're long in their journey, I think this is a great place to land to start to build that community. If you're early on in your journey, highly recommend NAMI. These guys are amazing. I have good friends. We have good support. They've got great classes and really very informative. So I'd start there as well. But in the meantime, this is how we're functioning, right? So thanks. Make sure to like, subscribe, and what else, One Gun?
Dr. Sheila Becking, thank you once again. And we will see you guys soon, and we will have her as a return guest. So thank you guys. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.